So tonight, everyone, we have Abby Redmond and Jolene Noble from Blue Rock Animal Nutrition here to talk about beef cattle nutrition. So take it away.
Thank you, Taryn. So yes, my name is Abby Redmond. I am a ruminant nutritionist with Blue Rock. We make custom mineral and we are independent nutritionists. So we talk a lot about nutrition every day. And I was asked to give a talk on the basics of beef cattle nutrition. So we'll just get into it here. So the first topic that I wanted to go over is the basics of feed digestion in a ruminant and the nutrient requirements that we look for from feed. So this is a basic overview of the digestive tract of a ruminant. So I'm sure we've all heard that a cow has 4 stomachs. So the first one is the rumen, reticulum, omasum, and abomasum, followed by the small intestine and the large intestine. I really won't be talking about the reticulum, omasum, and abomasum at all, but the rumen has a huge impact on what goes in versus what gets absorbed in the small intestine. So that's what we'll be mainly talking about today. So we often say that we don't feed the cow, we feed the bugs, and that's because the rumen is filled with microbes that are the ones that digest the feed that a cow eats. So the feed acts as fuel for the microbes, and they produce energy, fat, and protein that leave the rumen and get absorbed in the small intestine. So these fermentation products are what goes to the cow. It's not specifically the nutrients in the feed, but by adjusting the feed, we adjust the energy or the fuel that the microbes get to work more or less to produce these fermentation products. So when we're selecting a feed, the first thing to look at is what stage the animal is in the production cycle. So the main ones that we look at are mid-gestation, late gestation, and lactation. And the TDN, or the energy that we look for in those stages, are 55%, 60% for late gestation, and 65% for lactation. And the crude protein is 7% in mid-gestation, 9% in late, and 11% in lactation. So those are rules of thumb that you can just keep in the back of your mind. So whenever you're looking at a feed test, or if you're looking to buy feed, those are just some really quick ways to know how good the feed is and at what stage you would feed it. The neutral detergent fiber is another one. So it affects the bulkiness of the feed. So when the neutral detergent fiber is too high, it affects how much the animal can consume. If it's over 60% NDF, you start to worry that the animal can't consume enough to meet its energy and protein requirements. And it does have an effect on the dry matter intake as well. So normally a cow can eat 2.5% of her body weight. If the NDF is too high, so above 60%, she won't eat 2.5%. And if the neutral detergent fiber is low, say 48%, then a cow might be able to eat up to 6% of body weight. So it really does affect how much she can take in. And there are, so the long-term implications of not meeting these nutritional targets. The most obvious one that we can see fairly clearly is body condition score. But the other ones that are maybe less obvious but really do have an impact is fetal growth and development, milk production, and conception rate. And consistency is important. So we don't want to disrupt those rumen microbes. The population is hugely affected by the feed that a cow consumes. So a high starch, for example, high grain diet will have a large amount of starch digesting microbes, whereas a high fiber diet will have fiber loving microbes. And when you change the feed, it really affects which type of microbes are in the rumen. And that's why you want to make changes slowly over, say, a week to let those populations adjust to the new feed that's going into the rumen. So this is a really visual overview, just of what the nutrient requirements are throughout the production cycle. So on the left-hand side, you see TDN, that's the energy in feed. And then on the right is your crude protein. Your green bar is your energy and the red one is protein. So nutrient requirements are highest at peak lactation, and that's 2 months after calving. So that's when the quantity and quality of the milk is the highest. And it goes down from there and is lowest at weaning. So that's when milk production is has stopped and the cow is fairly early into the gestation cycle. So really at that time, she's just maintaining body weight. And so if adjustments need to be made for her body condition, this is a good time to do it because she doesn't require much in terms of energy and protein. But as the calf gets bigger and you get later into gestation, then the requirements go up again. And this is largely due to the size of the calf. So this is a picture of a placenta from 2 different animals. The picture on the left is what we like to see. So these are cotyledons, the red circles, and they transfer nutrients to the calf from the cow. And what we like to see is many of them and of a fairly uniform size. Whereas on the right, this animal was nutrient deficient. So the cotyledons are large and there's not very many of them, but this is an attempt of the body to try and get enough nutrients into the calf. I'll say that it's probably not successful if there isn't enough if there isn't enough nutrients from the feed. This is like a coping mechanism from the body, but it's likely not going to be successful in getting the calf the nutrients that it needs. So what are the factors? If we know we need good quality feed, what are some of the factors that affect the quality of protein, energy, and fiber? Maturity of the plants is one of the biggest ones. So the picture on the right here just shows how how stage of maturity impacts forage quality. So when plants are young, the protein, energy, vitamins, and minerals are high. And as plants mature, the quality goes down and fiber increases. So the main reason that producers or farmers will leave plants to mature is because you get a higher volume of feed, but you get lower quality. So you get more lower quality feed. Whereas if you were to cut earlier, you'll get less feed, but it's higher quality. So really assessing what you're looking for, what stage of the production cycle you need that you're targeting, and then you can kind of assess when you should cut just to meet those targets. Weathering is another one. So energy and protein are water-soluble nutrients. And so rain, say on a swath of hay, will really impact the energy and protein in that feed. So of course, reality sets in and you can't always get it baled, but when it gets rained on, that really does reduce the amount of energy and protein in the feed. And the moisture allows for the introduction of mold, which can be dangerous for any animal, but especially a pregnant one. And the type of forage. So when you know the energy and protein in your feed, you can select your supplementation accordingly. So here I have an example for protein. So corn has high energy but low protein, barley has better protein, and wheat has highest. So when you know what you have in your feed, you can select a supplementation that is appropriate to fit with the diet. So what comes out the back end? The feces is a really good, quick and easy way to see visually if your feed requirements are meeting what the animal needs. So the middle picture is what I'm calling a pudding consistency, and that is what we're targeting. So when the feces looks like that, it's meeting the protein and energy requirements for the cow. The cream soup picture on the left means that there is too much protein the diet is highly digestible and the animal is in an acidotic state. And on the right, the stacked picture there indicates that there's too much fiber and there's not enough energy and protein in that diet. So beyond just looking at the feces, feed testing is really the best way to know if you are meeting the nutrient requirements. Taking a representative sample is very important. So you don't want to just be probing one bale. We like to get at least 20 different bales from a lot of forage. And of course, if you have any questions about how to interpret the results, just make sure to ask a nutritionist. And this just really takes the guesswork out. So you're not assuming that a feed is good when it's not, and you really just make sure that you are providing the nutrients that are required throughout the entire production cycle. We'll move on to mineral supplementation. So first one is macrominerals. I'm not going to talk about the function of each one individually, but I just wanted to put a list there so that you could refer back to it at any time. And the macrominerals are calcium, phosphorus, sodium, magnesium, and potassium. And deficiencies in these often result in downer-like symptoms. So grass tetany and winter tetany, for example, can either be an excess of potassium or deficiency in magnesium. And milk fever is related to the calcium and phosphorus balance. Sodium, we often don't see deficiency, but we can see excess, which shows as edema in the udder and the brisket, just because of a result of fluid buildup. And the trace minerals are zinc, manganese, copper, cobalt, iron, selenium, and iodine. And again, I won't go through all of this in detail, but I did want to point out that immune response is highlighted for almost every trace mineral. So I just wanted to point out the importance that trace minerals have on the immune system, and meeting those requirements are really important to optimize the health of the herd. So this is some data that I gathered from grass sampling that we did this summer. So we took samples from pasture all over the province of Alberta, all the way from Lacrete down to Nanton. So we did Manning, Mayerthorpe, Red Deer, Caroline, Rocky Mountain House area, Hanna, and Nanton. And we took samples at 3 times of the year, June, August, and October. And this is showing the copper. So at any stage during grazing and in any location, copper was deficient. So if a producer was not providing a trace mineral salt, then animals would not have been getting their sufficient copper. Zinc is a little bit different. So in Lacrete, sufficient amounts of zinc were coming from the forage in Lacrete. But for everywhere else in the province, at least at some point, the zinc was deficient. So overall, we recommend that a trace mineral salt be provided in the summer, and throughout the winter, trace minerals are needed as well. Macrominerals, however, they don't need to be provided year-round. So calcium here, this is the same study, but it shows that throughout every location in the province and throughout the entire grazing season, calcium was being met by the forage, by the grass. Phosphorus, when grass is green and growing, was sufficient to meet the needs. But as grass dried off and browned off, so this year because of the drought, lack of moisture, grass browned off earlier in the year. And we see that pretty clearly with every location. So as grass browned off, then the phosphorus became deficient. So what we recommend is that macrominerals be provided only when grass browns off or when stored feeds are being provided. So beyond just meeting the nutrient requirements, there's a lot of connection and interaction between the minerals. So this graph, or this chart here on the left, shows how interconnected all the minerals are. And so beyond just meeting requirements, we have to consider these relationships. Calcium and phosphorus is a big one. And so the reason we're so interested in calcium and phosphorus is because when calcium or phosphorus, when it's too high in the diet, it cannot enter the bones. And in order for the calcium to be used for milk production, for example, it can't simply be taken from the blood and used for milk. It needs to go into the bones, come out, and then be used by the mammary gland. When it is outside of an acceptable ratio, so we like to see 2 to 1, and that's 2 calcium to 1 phosphorus in the blood. That's the best ratio for it to enter and exit the bones. When it's outside of that ratio, you can get problems where it can't enter the bones, it stays in circulation in the blood, and that's when you can see problems like milk fever. 2 to 1 is the best ratio. You can go as high as 7 to 1 in the ration without seeing problems, but above that or below that, you could see problems. So if you test your feed, you know what the calcium and phosphorus is in your diet, and you can select a mineral accordingly to bring it to that ratio between 2 to 1 and 7 to 1. The Tetany ratio, so we talked a little bit about Tetany earlier. This is the equation that we use to calculate the Tetany ratio, so potassium divided by calcium plus magnesium. And we like to see that below 2.2. Antagonists in the feed, so some of the big ones are sulfur, molybdenum, and iron. Molybdenum, excuse me, is one that we consider particularly for copper, because it'll bind copper in a 6 to 1 ratio. So for every percent of molybdenum that you have, you can consider 6% of your copper gone. So if you have high iron and sulfur, then even more will be gone, and you can see a secondary copper deficiency just because the copper that is there is getting tied up by these other minerals. So those are some things that we look at in your feed, and again, you can adjust that in your mineral by providing chelates, for example, that won't get tied up and they will actually get absorbed by the cow. And more is not better. So lots of times we hear that a little bit of mineral is a good thing, so lots must be a better thing, and that's not true. Toxicities can happen just as easily as deficiencies, and why pay for it when you don't need it? So mineral is not very cheap, and you don't need to be providing extra. Just a nice balance is all we look for. So vitamins in green growing grass are sufficient to meet an animal's needs. So vitamins you don't need to be providing when they're on lush green pasture, but when grass browns off, like in this first picture here, you have the stockpiled grass, you can consider that vitamins go down by 80%, and they would no longer meet the requirements. Even if grass is green, but it's mature, they can go down by 50%. And in siling, in baleage or silage, destroys vitamins altogether. So you can consider that none would come from the feed and 100% come from supplementation. So again, I won't go through all of these in detail, but the vitamins are highlighted for immunity here again. And vitamin E, I've put neonatal immunity, and that's because calves don't receive any vitamins when they're in the mom through the placenta. So 100% of their vitamins will come from the colostrum. And so we recommend that you bump up the vitamins in your cow mineral 6 weeks before calving to get the colostrum quality nice and high, get those vitamins high in the colostrum, and that'll give the calf the best chance possible to get the immunity high to be able to fight off anything that comes up. So some potential risks that we see with different feeds. This high straw ration is one that we see a lot Right now, this year, because of the drought and the lack of hay, there's a lot of producers out there feeding straw. And one of the biggest risks with this is impaction. And that is because there's not enough energy and protein being supplemented with the straw. So those microbes that I was talking about earlier, they take a lot of work and they need a lot of fuel in order to break down that high fiber diet. And that needs to come from supplementation such as grain. When there is not enough grain being supplied, not enough energy and protein being supplied, then those microbes can't work hard enough to break it down, and that feed just ends up getting stuck in the digestive tract. So I did an example ration here, a 1,400-pound cow in mid-gestation, that's 4 to 6 months after breeding, can eat 1.25% of body weight, and that's 17.5 pounds. She would need 11 pounds of barley in order to meet her energy and protein needs. And this gets worse in cold weather because we know that cows eat more, and so they're going to need more energy and protein to break down a higher amount of straw. So even up to 14 pounds would be a reasonable amount to feed of grain during cold weather. And as well, a good water supply is necessary to keep the digestive tract flowing, keep that material moving through it. So snow is not a good enough water source when you're feeding a high straw diet. They really do need a good water source. So nitrates are another one that we saw this year. Nitrates come from nitrogen in the soil that are converted into nitrate form, and they get taken up by the plant into the few bottom inches of the plant when it's stressed. And this can be due to hail, frost, drought, or heat, like we saw this year. And it's worse on pastures or in fields that have been heavily fertilized or heavily spread with manure. And nitrates accumulate over time. So they peak at 4 to 6 days after a stress event. And but they do go down once the plant grows. So the plant will use that nitrogen to make protein. But if you do have to harvest, it's best to do it within 24 hours or to wait 2 weeks while that plant grows and uses that nitrate for it to go down to a safe level. And we often get asked if a killing frost accumulates nitrates, and the answer is no, because the plant is dead. So that killing frost kills all the organelles in the plant. It can't pick up nitrates from the soil. However, if a plant already has high nitrates and there is a killing frost, then it also can't lose them. So it can't grow to use up that nitrate. So then you will have high nitrate feeds or high nitrate feed. And I just wanted to give a bit of an overview here of why it's toxic. So the nitrate in the rumen, the microbes convert it to nitrite, which goes, if it can't be used in the rumen, it goes into the blood and it binds to hemoglobin. So then that hemoglobin cannot carry oxygen. So essentially the animal suffocates, even if it's got access to oxygen. There are a few things that you can do to mitigate the risk of nitrates. The first thing is put them out full. So if you feed them hay or low nitrate feeds, get them full on that and then expose them to the high nitrate feeds. That'll prevent them from gorging and give a better chance of not having that high nitrate feed get consumed on a high amount. Use low-risk cattle if possible. By this I mean not pregnant cattle, because the nitrates will cause abortions. Gradual adaptation. So by this I mean give them gradually more access to it. For example, for swath grazing, if you had high nitrate swath grazing, you could cross fence it and give them a little bit of access and hay, and give them gradually, even over 2 weeks, more access to the high nitrate swath grazing. or if it's in bale form, if you've got green feed, then you can just gradually increase the proportion being fed. Nitrates are better used in the rumen when they're fed with a high energy diet. So if you can provide grain or some crop mixtures that have brassicas or immature grasses that have high energy, they tend to do better just because the rumen microbes have energy and fuel to convert that nitrate into usable protein. So if you were to get a feed test, you'll generally see the feed test come back with nitrates as nitrate nitrogen, and 0 to 1,000 is safe for any animal. 1,000 to 1,500 is safe for non-pregnant. But generally, we just recommend that if it's under 1,000, it's safe, and if it's over, then dilution is best. Mycotoxins are one that we haven't seen that much this year. They're usually worse on a wet year, and that's because they come from mold. So mold itself is not harmful, but when it gets stressed from cold, for example, from freezing, it'll produce toxins called mycotoxins that can decrease your dry matter intake even by as much as 30%. You get poor growth performance, you get a reduced immune system, and they're very bad for pregnant animals. You can see abortion, premature birth, and reduced milk production. So it's best just to not feed to pregnant animals. Ergot is another one that we tend to see more in wet years. It can be found in grass or in grain. So in the picture on the right here, you can clearly see ergot in the grain. But when you get grain screenings that make pellets, then it's very hard to see any ergot. So usually the ergot will go with the grain screenings and get converted into the pellet, and you really can't see the ergot in there. So if you are buying pellets, it's important to ask your supplier if they're testing for ergot and what the levels are. The reason it is, or the harm that it causes, is that it's a vasoconstrictor, which means it shrinks the blood vessels. So for pregnant animals in particular, you can get reduced blood flow to the uterus, and the calf doesn't get the nutrients it needs. You can also see things like frozen ears just because of those veins constricting. So we recommend that you do not feed 200 parts per billion, over 200 parts per billion of ergot in the total ration. So in summary, it's best to know what the nutrients are, minerals and energy and protein in your feed, and match that forage to the stage of production. Feed trace minerals year-round, and vitamins and macrominerals should be fed when grass browns off and when you're feeding stored feed. And be aware of potential risks in your feed, such as nitrates and mycotoxins. We always say that they're less of a risk when you know about them. And so I've just put my contact information here and Jolene's. So Jolene works with Blue Rock up in the Peace Country. So I know you're up that way. So if you have any questions about the presentation or about nutrition in general or what Blue Rock does, you can feel free to give either of us a call or an email.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your presentation. Does anyone have any questions? If you don't feel comfortable unmuting, you can always ask them in the chat and then I'll ask them. It doesn't look like it. If anyone's looking for your guys' contact information, I have it as well. I can send it to people if they're interested.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you again. So that was great.
Yeah, no problem at all. Happy to do it.
Mm-hmm. Abby, I don't know, do you want to go over kind of the process that Blue Rock goes through when developing a mineral?
Yeah, sure, I can talk about that. So the first thing that we do is we feed samples. So a nutritionist Myself or Jolene or some of the other nutritionists at Blue Rock will come to your farm and get feed samples. We send it away to a lab in Ontario. It takes about a week for us to get results back. We will email you those results and give you a call to go over them. So we'll sort out a feeding program for you if that's what you're looking for. So we'll totally make up rations for every stage, you know, mid-gestation, late gestation, lactation. And then we make a custom mineral for you. So when you're in mid-gestation and late gestation, or part of late gestation, we can make a mineral with maintenance level vitamins suited to your feed. And so that way it's custom. You're not paying for minerals that you don't need. And then as you move closer to calving, we'll bump up the vitamins for you. And we do deliver to your farm. So even Jolene has some customers up like Fort Vermilion way or Lacrete, and we deliver all the way up there too. So there's really not an area of the province that we don't touch. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much again. It was really great having you here to present for us.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you for having me.